Date August 19, 2005. Location Larnaca International Airport in southern Cyprus. Local time 8:01. This aircraft, belonging to Helios Airways with flight number 522, was preparing to fly first to Athens, the capital of Greece, and then to Prague, the capital of Czechia, with a layover. Flight number 522 was to be operated with a Boeing 737 aircraft with tail number 5 Bravo Delta Bravo Yankee. Initially operated by a German company named DBA in 1998, the aircraft's tail number was Delta Alpha Delta Bravo Quebec. It had made its first flight in 1997 and had been operated by DBA Airlines since 1998. On April 16, 2004, it had been leased to Helios Airways with a new tail number and named Olympia. Helios Airways was a low-cost carrier with only 3 aircraft and experienced busy summers. This 737-300 aircraft was still quite young, only 7 years old. The weather was clear, and conditions were suitable for flight. Captain pilot Hans Jürgen was an experienced pilot at the age of 59. He was a German pilot hired for the summer season due to the increasing flights during summer. Hans Jürgen had been flying for 35 years and had accumulated 16,900 flight hours. First Officer Pampos, aged 55, had been serving at Helios Airways for 5 years. He was a citizen of southern Cyprus, where Helios Airways was headquartered. Pampos had 7,500 flight hours. Both pilots had a considerable amount of flight experience. The aircraft was scheduled to depart for Athens at 9 o'clock local time. Helios Flight 522 had 115 passengers and 6 crew members on board. After routine checks by the pilots, the aircraft began its takeoff at 9:05 local time with clearance from the tower. Helios Airways Flight 522 took off for Athens for a planned flight duration of 1 hour and 23 minutes. About 5 minutes after takeoff, the climb had just begun, and suddenly an alarm started ringing in the cockpit. The pilots were puzzled because the ringing alarm was the takeoff warning signal. The takeoff warning signal only sounds when the aircraft is on the ground, indicating to the pilots that the aircraft is not ready for takeoff. The pilots tried to solve the problem amongst themselves, but the issue was something out of the ordinary. Later, Captain Pilot Jürgen contacted the Helios Operations Office at Larnaca Airport. "Pilot, our takeoff warning signal is sounding." As the takeoff warning system sounded, more surprising things began to happen, and the master alarm started ringing. This alarm indicated that some systems of the aircraft were overheating. Later, the operations office summoned a flight engineer and attempted to communicate with the pilot. While the pilots and the operations office were searching for the cause of the 2 alarms in the aircraft, the passengers on board were unaware that something was amiss. However, a few minutes later, oxygen masks deployed. Now, the passengers were aware that something was wrong. The cabin crew also did not understand what was happening. As per procedure, they expected the aircraft to level off or begin descent after the oxygen masks deployed. The pilots were unaware that the oxygen masks in the passenger cabin had deployed, and they did not know why the takeoff warning signal was activated or why their systems were overheating. The ground engineers were also trying to solve the problem, but were unable to find the issue. As the aircraft's cabin pressure continued to decrease every second, communication became increasingly difficult over time. And the aircraft continued to climb. About 30 minutes after takeoff, the Helios Operations Office lost contact with the aircraft. The aircraft was then over the Mediterranean and progressing towards Athens. Air traffic control attempted to contact the aircraft numerous times, but received no response. Athens flights typically lasted 1.5 hours, but Olympia had been airborne for 2 hours. Air traffic control suspected that the aircraft might have been hijacked by other individuals, and feared it could be a terrorist act, as Athens had a population of 3 million people at that time, and there was fear of a catastrophe if the aircraft were to crash in Athens. Subsequently, the Greek Air Force dispatched 2 advanced fighter jets to intercept the Helios Airways aircraft named Olympia. When the 2 fighter pilots reached Olympia, they received no response. One of the fighter jets positioned itself on the left side of the aircraft, and the other positioned itself at the rear. The fighter pilot on the left side of the aircraft looked into the cockpit, but couldn't see the captain pilot. Instead, he saw the first officer in an unconscious state. The fighter pilot then relayed this information to the Air Traffic Control Office, and then moved a little further back to check on the passengers. When he checked, he saw all the passengers lying unconscious with oxygen masks on their faces. And then he saw movement in the cockpit. F-16s continued to follow the aircraft, and the fighter pilot on the left side of the aircraft attempted to establish eye contact with the person sitting in the cockpit. It was later revealed that the person sitting in the cockpit was one of the cabin crew members, Andreas. The fighter pilot, trying to communicate with Andreas, unfortunately couldn't establish contact. This cabin crew member had received pilot training, but had no knowledge about the 737, and had not received any training regarding it. And then the aircraft began to turn to the left suddenly. At that moment, the aircraft, which was at an altitude of 10,000 meters, suddenly began to descend rapidly towards the ground, and neither the F-16s nor the air traffic control could establish communication with the aircraft in any way. Helios 522 unfortunately crashed approximately 3 hours after taking off from southern Cyprus, around noon. After the crash, the F-16s quickly confirmed that Helios 522 had tragically crashed, and the teams immediately headed to the crash site. Firefighting aircraft, fire brigades, and ambulances swiftly arrived at the scene and immediately began extinguishing the fire. Unfortunately, no one survived. Helios was a small airline with only 3 aircraft, so all the employees knew each other, unlike in larger companies, and everyone was deeply saddened by the events. This incident is the largest airplane crash in Greek history. Almost all of the casualties were from southern Cyprus, and after the incident, mourning was declared in southern Cyprus. Inspectors had immediately begun investigating the cause of the accident, but their task was extremely difficult because the wreckage had spread over a wide area and suffered extensive damage. The black box was found a few days after the crash, and it was later determined that the third person in the cockpit was cabin crew member Andreas. Subsequently, it was understood that the reason the aircraft turned left before crashing was due to the left engine running out of fuel, causing the plane to unintentionally bank left. Information from the black box indicated that the primary reason for the aircraft's descent was due to fuel exhaustion, leading to the plane crashing to the ground. However, there was still no definitive proof of what had occurred. When maintenance records of the aircraft were examined, it was found that a year earlier, the plane had encountered a sudden pressure drop issue. One of the door hinges had become partially open, requiring an emergency landing, but there were no casualties. Investigators later examined a control panel found in the wreckage, identified as the pressure control panel. Its function was to automatically regulate the cabin pressure to ensure passengers and crew could breathe at high altitudes. This panel was supposed to always remain in automatic mode. As the aircraft climbed, the engines would automatically draw air from the sky to replenish the cabin, with small valves releasing excess air for oxygen circulation during flight. If this panel was manually set, pilots would need to adjust it themselves. During a morning maintenance check, engineers had switched this panel from automatic to manual and completed the maintenance without returning it to automatic. The pilots did not realize that this panel, which they were used to seeing in automatic mode, was left in manual. Consequently, after takeoff, the cabin pressure could not be adjusted, leading to hypoxia as the climb continued. Passenger masks were supported by a chemical generator capable of supplying oxygen for only 12 minutes. Unfortunately, not switching the button back to automatic mode proved to be a fatal mistake. In subsequent live practical tests, It was understood that pilots found it very difficult to notice when this button remained in manual mode. The reason pilots did not understand the alarms that were sounding was because throughout their careers, they had rarely encountered alarms due to pressure loss. As a result, the pilots did not recognize the alarms, and as time passed, they lost consciousness due to lack of oxygen. As a result of this accident, all 121 passengers and crew lost their lives, and mourning was declared in South Cyprus. Helios Airways suffered damage to its reputation, and its aircraft were grounded, leading to the freezing of its bank accounts by the Cyprus government. Consequently, Helios Airways ceased operations and declared bankruptcy on November 7, 2006. Helios Airways Flight 522 is a memorial to those who lost their lives.